Imagine a vibrant discussion between people that includes both openness and critical thought in the pursuit of truth. The Purchasing Truth podcast is an experience, a journey, an exploration of the impact that negative messages in politics and the media have on our families, community, society, and nation. Join your hosts, Bill Stierle and Tom to discover new concepts and language strategies that will reveal effective ways of establishing truth. This podcast series will tackle current events, leadership challenges, healthcare confusion, integrity in business, and many other areas that affect us all. Gain clarity and understanding of the various truth perspectives. Welcome to Purchasing Truth.
Welcome back to Purchasing Truth. I'm Tom Hazard, along with Bill Stierle. And, Bill, it's very interesting. There is this battle going on in our country right now about defining what it means to have a bill for infrastructure. There's going to be an interesting messaging and communication battle, and it's going to be fun to watch and see who prevails in that battle to define exactly what might be included under the umbrella of infrastructure.
Yeah, making communication safe around alternative points of view, being able to really create a collaborative narrative versus an adversarial narrative is something that this is a unique part in our history as a nation, to be this exposed to multiple messages that can come in from anything that can knock somebody off the pedestal with either a small charge or even or get away with a big charge. Those are really two dynamics that are really taking place. If all there has to happen is the right small message can knock somebody out, and then there also could be this big message is going like, there's a lot of wrong over here, but it's not that big of a deal. It's like, how does that exist at the same time in a society where you can't even have an honest discussion about, the truth around this is that, yeah, but he's on our side, so he's not, there's not a lot of problems there. So our perspective is getting adjusted, and it's been really hard to not be so deluged with biases, people trying to influence with our bias, because all you got to do is concentrate on one particular silo, and you're going like, how are those people buying what's in that silo? There's that information is not has it's true, but it's really limited, and it's only a partial truth around that thing. So anyway, so we're going to have a little fun today to talk about how this infrastructure piece is going to be discussed. Is it an investment or is it a waste?
Well,
look how clean that
fascinating.
Is it clean? Is it an investment or is it a waste? Is it needed? Well, I don't know. You built something in 1950, 1960, 1970. You built something then. Do you think you may not need to replace it? I don't know, Tom, have you ever, I think you and I can have some fun with this one. Have we ever bought a car that we held on too long and we should have got rid of it before it ran into the expenses that it did?
Of course. Yeah. And I've gone down that road of spending too much money to try to fix a car when I should have just put a bullet in it and gotten a new car, So that's a tricky one. And I think it really is a good example, a good metaphor for what's going on around America when it comes to our infrastructure. And clearly infrastructure in its purest sense is roads and bridges and maybe airports and train stations and trains, the rails themselves and all these sorts of things. But the question that's going to be debated is, does that also include electric cars, electric charging stations? So, not just the roads themselves, but the vehicles and the infrastructure to drive on those roads?
Exactly right. Yes.
Does that include other aspects of infrastructure? What about reservoirs and clean drinking water systems? And, we're having a crisis in Florida going on right now with wastewater, systems that are
As
crumbling
breaking
and
out.
leaking, right?
Yeah, they're leaking the pollution that can get into the environment, from that piece. Could be that, that negative amplification that allows people to really wake up. So you get the brain does much better with negative amplification than it does with positive amplification. It's like, because when you're buying for the future, you go like, well, there's a positive amplification for we're moving forward here. The negative amplifications, but what if we overspend? What if we don't see something that's coming that we need to see coming? Now, notice that sentence can really mess us up. What if we spent that we don't see coming? I don't know. I don't have that kind of future thinking in the crystal ball that is needed. And the person says, well, what if? See that safety, that doubt, that skepticism, the truth and the trust that there might be something. Well, I don't know. Let that thing show, and then we'll deal with it then. Might be a way something my dad would have said. I don't want to think about that thing that's over there that I don't see. I just want to do this thing here and fix this thing here. It's not the best. It's not the best way to do it, maybe, but at least I am getting progress. At least I'm getting movement. And that's one of the challenges that we have with our own brain and our own bias is that we're going to get dinged about the value of, what is the value of this thing that we're purchasing and what are we getting? Think about the highway system in the United States. And you and I, we've talked about this before in the past, but I mean, I don't know. You just drove back and forth to Colorado. I mean, what an
Yeah,
experience that
it
was.
was quite an experience. I mean, when you think about the biggest infrastructure project in the country, actually, I can think of two major infrastructure projects in the country that have been absolutely critical to America's growth and all our freedoms, really, to drive from state to state on
Right.
roads that before the interstate highway system, I was reading this very interesting article that talks about how Dwight Eisenhower, who of course was a military commander in World War II, and in the late 40s or early 50s, before he was president, was part of a military convoy that went from the East Coast to the West Coast, driving across the country. And he was shocked and really alarmed, frustrated. I mean, lots of words you could use there, to the fact that during a good portion of that journey, this military convoy could only go at a speed of 10 miles an hour. When you think about traveling across the country, that's, a 3,000-mile journey at 10 miles an hour, that's going to take you a very long time. Now, that wasn't the entire trip, but portions of it. You think about it in the Midwest, where, and in the Rockies, and, certain places where roads were just not built for traveling through, but just locally getting around from here to there. You can understand how that might have been difficult. So this drove him to really champion, when he was president, the interstate highway system. And that allowed me and my family to drive for more than half the trip at 80 miles an hour, especially through Utah.
Right.
Going from Colorado to California, going through Utah, the speed limit is 80 miles an hour. And a lot of the rest of the trip, it's still through Nevada and Arizona is like 75 miles an hour.
Right.
And you can do that in 2 days. You can go an 1,100 plus mile trip, in 2 days. And that's practical. Would not be possible without the interstate highway system. Now, forget just the family driving. What about all the goods and services with trucks
That's the one.
traveling across
That's
it?
the one. That's right. The goods and services. Yeah. Yeah.
But even as I'm driving on that trip, I'm experiencing, whoa, a lot of this highway at 80 miles an hour in Utah, there's been, because of cold weather and frost heaves and all sorts of things, it's my car's going up and down and up and down and up and down as I'm driving really fast. It's kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm getting a little nauseous because it's like an amusement park ride at sometimes. And clearly, roads and bridges we've seen in recent years in, Minnesota, Oregon, I think recently even in Tennessee, there have been bridge collapses. And there's a lot of this infrastructure that just, you can't just build it once and forget it. It's got to be maintained. And so I think it's really a very truly bipartisan issue. I think everybody can agree that our roads and bridges and our transportation infrastructure is critical and needs to be maintained. And it's probably overdue for a serious overhaul. We haven't invested in this in a half a century.
Right, and I appreciate the perspective that we're trying to dig here is and get people to really hear about the perspective of, are we going to narrow the message or are we going to expand the message? A narrowing message says, well, it only does, 5 to 10% is on roads and bridges. Well, that could be all that's really needed in roads and bridges, is that amount that would make a big difference. It's not they should spend more about it, or that proves that they're putting money elsewhere. Well, there might be other infrastructure problems that are showing up that
Oh,
are future oriented. Yeah.
well, like, let's just throw in there the Texas electric grid that we experienced a couple months ago. There's an infrastructure problem that was hurt terribly by temperature, weather, right?
It's the pesky thing called weather, and the inability of that closed unit, closed system of we're Texas, we're just going to do our own electricity here, and we're not going to take any electricity from other states. We're not going to be wired in. We're just going to keep our grid like this and run it as a private, or mostly private. I believe it's a private institute. It's like, yikes. It's there's
Well,
it's very, very hard to to really get a perspective of this when we got people shouting from both sides.
right. And just Bill, to add one more thing, in that you have a lot of experience with your work with in the state of Michigan, with the city of Flint and the water crisis. There is also, my understanding is proposed in the infrastructure bill is money to replace pipes in, that have lead in them, especially in some of our water systems in cities across the country. I mean, that's a serious infrastructure need there as well.
Right, right. I think that I think it's really, really hard to gain the perspective that um that capitalism needs a strong infrastructure to sit on, to run well, because there's things that capitalism doesn't do very well, and you want it to participate in a certain sector of the economy, whereas things that need to be done in the public space, you want to keep in the public space. Things you don't want to think about, do, or have, you keep that in the public space. We don't want to have prisons, but if you make it private, then that company needs to grow. And I don't want more prisons, because then I'm going to look around for more people to jail to fill my prison. And I'm going to start prosecuting smaller and smaller crimes. If I do that, I'm going to actually lobby to make more people go to jail, because I'm a private business. But if you have that in the public sector, there's no one really going to advocate for it, because it's something that the public sector takes care of, because it's messy and we don't want to do much of it. We want to run it as cost effectively as possible. Well, as soon as you put it as a private company, it's how do we make it more profitable versus how do we make it more cost effective? It's not, those don't necessarily go together.
I agree. Yeah. If you make it profitable at the expense of people's conditions of their lives or their liberties or whatever, I mean, you can see how easily the profit motive can trample over,
Right.
human rights and maybe issues of justice, fairness, things like that. That's really troubling. But to be fair to, I don't think we want to just paint infrastructure broadly here as a pure and good thing. I mean, I think there are things proposed in the infrastructure bill that I think could really be argued, especially depending on your perspective. Is that really infrastructure? Is home health care for seniors infrastructure? Or is that a social service? Or is that what there are things that are in there that are being criticized, that and this is where actually the messaging and the communication is going to come into play, because the Democrats are trying to define infrastructure more broadly and the Republicans are trying to define it more narrowly. And not only more narrowly, they're trying to paint it as a tax and spend, spree by the Democrats.
Yeah. Infrastructure is not a a weekend, in Cabo where you're drinking and you're just going to spend money for this thing. You get a building, you get a bridge, you get a program, you get an infrastructure, you get a new cable system to rural communities, um, you get the modern world to the American modern world to increase, and just to do scary honesty, to catch up with many other countries that have pulled ahead slash way ahead of us in technology, and we get to be and start to become competitive and more interconnected, in a better way, and that's not a bad thing.
No, I agree. And actually, just another brief story to put some perspective on this. So I drove across the country when I was 17 years old with a buddy. We went literally from Massachusetts to San Diego. And we broke down several times in our vehicle, which was a 1969 VW Beetle.
Oh boy. Oh my gosh,
We
yes.
broke down in the middle of Kansas a couple times, and we didn't have any cell phone. We didn't have, any a lot of the modern conveniences, and it was for a few days there pretty tough to get some support, get the vehicle to where it needed to be to get fixed and continue on our journey. And now on my journey driving from Colorado to Southern California, we had, yeah, some spots through Utah where the internet connection or the cell phone connection was spotty, but for most of the way I could make a phone call. Now, should that infrastructure be improved by modern standards? Yes. If you break down, you want to be able to call AAA and get some support and and do that. And in fact, stopping at a rest area to look at this beautiful scenic overview of this canyon carved by water thousands of years ago, looking up on a, I won't call it a mountaintop, but on a hilltop, there was this very odd tree that was much taller than all the other trees. And it took me a second to realize, oh, that's a cell tower made to look like a tree. So,
Right.
so
Yeah.
there's, I mean, infrastructure I think includes our communication and includes in the modern 21st century internet, being more broadly available. And while it's, certainly it's a first world problem, maybe,
First world problem. Yep.
um, anybody driving for 2 days with kids in the car is thrilled that there's an internet connection. Their kids can stream Netflix as we're driving.
It's,
you know
it's like, how do we get to this spot? Which is, we got to this spot by, some moves that were made by government to build the infrastructure that was needed for those companies to run on, and to allow that the initial expanse of those businesses to work the way they do. Now, I would like the marketplace to be more competitive. I'd like them to be able to work in a way to improve their services to compete with another capitalist, company that, hey, we're in your area too. So you got to take care of Mr. Jones over there, or otherwise he's going to be my client soon. He's going to be my customer. That is more of that healthy give and take. Can you and I've or market share inside the marketplace. Well, that's a vibrant, you know, capitalist, uh, you know, what we should be striving for to have that. It's over there. And why are we not doing here? Well, we're protecting everybody else's turf. Well, that's not really, you know, capitalism. That's more turf wars. That's more gang warfare. That's more, this is my territory and not your territory. Don't come in here. You're not doing this because these are my customers. It's like, nah, I don't think that's exactly capitalism. So,
Well,
so we've got to be mindful of how do we communicate the message of infrastructure to be inclusive rather than
well, right, absolutely. And so, well, I mentioned before that the Republicans are broadly trying to paint this infrastructure bill that the Biden administration has proposed as nothing more than a tax hike on corporations, and they've rolled out the job creators, messaging again, that saying that, hey, they're taxing job creators, and it'd be interesting to see if that message plays well again, because they said, oh, well, we need to lower the taxes on job creators in the Trump administration, right?
See, it's not whether it plays well or doesn't play well.
Ah,
That doesn't see our communication, Tom. It's like it's all about activating an old belief,
mm,
like trickle down economics is going to come around again because people have heard that phrase and heard that term, and there was enough energy that it was a good thing in the past, even though it wasn't a good thing from a numerical standpoint. It was a good thing for the people that got the tax break, but it was not a good thing from the this thing they said it would do, that a job creator would do it. So you got to think of this, and for all the listeners out there, think of this as that it's an activation of a belief bias. And even though we're talking about Republican here, Democrat have their own sticky talking points that they go after, and they're looking to pluck in things that they would see as valuable that many Republicans would not see as valuable. Now, like you mentioned a little earlier, Tom, does health care for the elderly, or whatever amount of money that's allocated for whatever that part of the bill is, does that become the weak chain in this, the weak link in this chain of things that says, do they go attack that and then they break the chain, and then the whole bill goes away because they found the weak socialist thing that's going to help elderly people? Is that the thing? And I don't want to pay for grandma or grandpa anymore, or somebody else's grandma or somebody else's grandpa. I don't want to do that because I see that as a waste of money. It's like, it's still a head shaker that people are thinking in that way, because things get out of proportion. It's like this is only this amount of money to take care of a small problem in a specific area, but all of a sudden that gets amplified. That's the negative amplifier we were talking about. And that's what happens in communication, is it's a negative amplifier or a positive amplifier about the thing to buy or sell. And regrettably, our brain just bites on the bias narrative, regrettably. you know.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see the Democrats and the current administration is trying to cast the bill as a job creation bill, right? It is going to rebuild our infrastructure and at the same people put a lot of Americans back to work, which is, I think at a time when our economy has been hurting and a lot of people are out of work. I think that it's interesting to see how that message is received and does that get amplified. Certainly they're trying to do that, but you're right. It's interesting when I wonder, Bill, I wonder, we should do some research and find out who defined the word trickle down economics. Did the Republicans do that to themselves? If they did, I mean, I would imagine, Bill, if you were advising them back in the 80s on communication messages, would you call it trickle down economics, or would you maybe label it as something like flow through economics, or something that had like a more positive spin? If you're trying to sell that, trickle down seems like, oh, I'm getting a few drips of water instead of the waterfall coming down from above.
Yeah, I think what happens in the brain is that a phrase becomes and a branding message becomes easily understood as something good or bad, and it actually doesn't mean it. Actually, even if it's not congruent with the phrase trickle down, because the messaging is not really great if you look at it and you keep thinking about, oh, trickle down, I'm waiting for money to come to me. That
Or
doesn't sound
it's like you're a
particularly good.
dog under the table begging for, crumbs and scraps to fall off the table. You're not getting a real meal.
That's great. And so you and I are now taking a slash at a brand imprint that would take literally hundreds of messages to go hammer that thing, hundreds of images, and immediately what are some things that are trickly? Pee and other things like that are trickly too. It's like, do you want to be that person? Now all of a sudden we're taking a hammer on a brand imprint that will be remessaged, just like the tax and spend, the socialism, the and your and those terms have been painted in such a way that we can't have a truthful discussion about, well, police officers is a socialism piece and firemen is a socialism piece, and these are called social constructs. This is, and here's, and roads, this is things we all use that we find is valuable. We use those and we want those around because we would like those things to be cared for in our society, because if they're not there, that will not be a good thing for a modern growing first world country. And that even that you and I are talking about this thing is is really disturbing, because if we were talking about things on the front end of growth um, and how do we get expansion to take place, the conversation would be, hey, how are we going to put the next entrepreneurial thing in place so we can hire 10 more people so that we can do this little project and see if we can get that to stick in the environment, and if that doesn't work, then we'll move over here and do this, and we'll try to get, and those are giving things for people to do, having for people to have an experience and a shared journey, which is more of a growth mindset, which is different than a fighting over infrastructure. That doesn't sound like a good, really, strategy, but it is. We are in a very unique time where messaging can be siloed and people can be kept away from truth, and that's what we've got to do a better job of, is to make sure that capitalism has the support it needs and the foundation for it to run on, and that foundation comes in multiple different ways. It's not just roads and bridges. It is multiple different industries that need infrastructure upgrades. And it's hard for people to think of it that way, but it's getting the expanse, and changing our perspective and our perception in order to include a wider messaging. And that's, I think that could really make a big difference going forward.
I agree, it really can, but it's going to be fun for us to watch the debate continue to play out
Right.
between the really two perspectives, right?
Right.
And see which messages stick
That's right.
as the Republicans try to narrow the message and say, hey, infrastructure shouldn't include all this other stuff. It should only be this narrow slice. We shouldn't spend that much money. And Democrats continue to expand it to try to include as much as possible,
Right.
because that's their nature. In that
Yeah.
it's a different mindset of investing in the future or being financially prudent, really,
Right.
isn't it?
It is. We need to take a look at a couple of our different business sectors and figure out how to best support and create a new set of soil for the new businesses to grow upon, whether it's charging stations for electric cars, repair companies. I mean, there's got to be somebody that's got to fix those electric car charging stations, and companies will come up, and there'll be 3, 5, 7 of those companies initially, and they're gonna do different parts of the nation. They're gonna fix the things that break for electric cars, and we got to get ready for that, because all those gasoline stations, they're going to be converted into other facilities, or have a charging station part in their world. It's going to be interesting to see how the world's going to look in the next 10 years as we move forward here.
It really is. I mean, I saw a couple now in Southern California. We see Teslas on the road every day, don't
Sure.
you? I mean, I can't drive a mile in Southern California without seeing a couple of Teslas. And I know that's not the same all over the country. As I'm
Right.
driving through Utah on this long stretch of road with few stops with services,
Sure.
I saw a Tesla on this journey. I was like, wow, that Tesla must have to really be careful. And I know, again, first world problems, right? But this Tesla, I'm like, wow, they must have a real specific map of where the next charging station is, because you don't have one at every service stop along the way. So you're right, Bill. I mean, there's a whole thing that as we really move toward electric vehicles, and electric vehicles, they're coming. I mean, I just am seeing ads all over the place from GMC for an all electric Hummer
Oh yeah.
that is coming, and they're taking reservations on. I mean, you're going to have a big vehicle, and maybe it has a 300-mile range, 350-mile range, but some of these states you can go 300 miles without much of any gas station too. You've
That's true.
got to they've going to have to outfit all these stops, especially in the middle of America,
Yep.
with charging stations.
Yep.
And who's going to
Yeah.
who's going to do that? I think it takes the government to invest in that in order to
It,
make it happen, doesn't it?
it's just such a big thing. We got to let the government do the big things that need to be done, the big things, not all the big things. And by the way, there's plenty of people that are government contractors that are businesses that will sign and do a contract for a part of that work. So there's really, it's not the government is spending and doing. The government is hiring some company over here in Topeka, Kansas, to get it done. So it's
Yeah.
really that's the mindset that I would that's the perspective that I would like people to get, is to relax your mind into not get caught into the silo that you've been spoken into, because the truth regarding infrastructure is that we've got to be able to do a better job of looking at and getting our eyes up. We've been looking with our eyes down for a long time, 10 years for sure, but the last 20 years has been really, really tough, difficult. And we've got to start, not looking through the rear view mirror to drive the car of the United States. I mean, the last slogan that we went on was "Make America Great Again." It was a rear view mirror look. It was not it wasn't forward looking. It was make it great again. It's like as if there was something missing. We need to get our eyes up. The only problem is that we weren't driving anywhere. And it wasn't a future oriented narrative, and regrettably. And it could have been a future oriented. Well, this is how we're going to make America great again, and then do something to make America great again, instead of just give a tax break. So we've got a few more things to do to broaden the narrative, and it's really, really hard to fight for truth when we have different silos. And the next time we talk, Tom, I think that we can take a look at how the debt impacts this, how how money works, because the money narrative gets split pretty good. So this version of truth and perspective, I think it might even be part 2 or part 3 that we've talked about perspective, but it's really about the truth and infrastructure. How do we get a fresh perspective on infrastructure? So, well, more to come on this, Tom, next time.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I look forward to talking about the debt. I think it's a great next step.
All right, thanks, Tom.
Thanks,
everybody.
Bill.
Thank you for listening to this Purchasing Truth podcast. We trust that you have enjoyed this engaging and thought-provoking conversation. Our hope is that you've received value, found clarity, and broadened your truth perspective in this episode. If you did, leave us a review or visit our website, purchasingtruth.com. Join us again for another informative and content-rich discussion here at the Purchasing Truth podcast. Don't just accept whatever information comes your way. Join the discussion. Discover your own voice. Purchase your own truth.